Really interesting piece by a PhD candidate at the University of Cambridge, Quillette.com. The question is, have the Champagne socialists I speak of, have they moved from conspicuous consumption to conspicuous conviction as the basis for the status they seek? He writes, does Mr. Henderson, this PhD student, Rob Henderson, of the luxury belief class he encountered at Yale 4 years ago. In the past, writes Henderson, people displayed their membership of the upper class with their material accoutrements. But today, luxury goods are more affordable than before. People are less likely to receive validation for the material items they display. This is a problem for the affluent who still want to broadcast their high social position. But they've come up with a clever solution. The affluent have decoupled social status from goods and reattached it to beliefs. Yeah. The luxury belief class. Charles Murray, he tweeted out this piece with this comment from a friend of his daughter. My daughter's immigrant friend asked her dissertation defense why she had not asked during her dissertation defense why she had not dealt with a Marxist interpretation of her topic, which was which was about the Cold War. That was the topic area. Her response, his daughter's immigrant friend, I grew up in Eastern Europe during the Cold War. I do not indulge in recreational Marxism. Oh, I love that term.
That's good.
I love that phrase, recreational Marxism. That's what Champagne socialists practice, recreational Marxism. It's for social status. And so that's what they're trafficking in. It's not the homes and boats and cars. It's the conspicuous conviction. And if this is true, what are the implications? Well, to help us understand this, if he does indeed accept the premise, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend Rusty Reno, the editor at First Things, firstthings.com. Rusty, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Great to be on the show.
What do you think about that, this idea that for the elites, whether they're affluent or they're in elite positions that put them in those the circles of affluence, it is no longer about conspicuous consumption. It's about conspicuous conviction.
I think there's a lot to the Rob Henderson's analysis. There's a what we call the term is virtue signaling, and I think part of the value of his analysis, he shows how the virtue signaling is actually also class signaling. I'm a member of the cognoscenti. I belong to the club. There's no doubt about that.
Right, and
so that all the time.
But so then, how should people who they purport to speak on behalf of, how should they receive these virtue signalers, these conspicuous convictions?
Certainly with suspicion. Henderson has an interesting backstory. He's from a pretty gritty background. He was a foster child and then adopted by a lesbian couple and grew up in Northern California. And I think one of the two women was actually killed by a lover, another person. And so he comes from and then he joined the Air Force. So when he got to Yale, I think it just gave him a critical perspective. They always say that, and they want people to adopt a critical perspective, but of course nobody does at these elite universities. They all say the same thing. But his background, I think, gave him the perspective to say, "Hey, what's going on? How can an elite school be so preoccupied with denouncing privilege?"
Well, if that's
that should raise suspicion, shouldn't it?
Yeah, one would hope, and I think that's the problem is we're still in the hope phase that it would raise suspicions. So the question is, if that is correct, if that's an analysis that is valuable, then what are the implications? Because you have, the Charles Murray's daughter's friend, I don't engage in recreational Marxism. For those elites, the affluent, it may be recreational. For what they're willing to tolerate and the repression that may come with it, that they're also willing to tolerate, that may not work out so well for those that are not part of the cognoscenti. And is there a real understanding of the implications? Are those some of the implications of what we're talking about here, this idea that status signaling is without consequence.
Well, I guess it used to be when I was a kid that was you knew which fork to use at the fancy dinner. That's always very confusing. Or which of the fancy wine glasses is for the red wine and which is for the white wine. And that's the kind of status signaling that's relatively innocent. But here you have political views, which of course affect everyone in society if they're implemented. And I think you're onto something by saying how dangerous this is for our society. Because people's interest is not really with questions of justice; it's a question of signaling their own status.
Well, and for example, a real-world example relates to the Me Too movement. Thomas Frank had a good piece, who's a man of the left, had a good piece really at the outset of this with Harvey Weinstein. And he basically said, look, Harvey Weinstein's liberalism, per his famous first response that, look, I don't have time to deal with these allegations. I'm too busy fighting the NRA. The whole idea was, hey, my conspicuous conviction, my positions on these political issues absolve me of any responsibility for my barbaric actions in my personal life. So it gives me license to do what I want, including to exploit women.
Well, it didn't work in his case.
No.
I guess that shows the limits of this kind of status signaling. But yeah, I mean, that's obviously what he thought. He thought if you had all the right views, then you would be, in with the in crowd, and then you wouldn't be vulnerable to anybody attacking you. But that's kind of what these status markers do. They establish the charmed circle of the privileged versus everybody else. That hate has no home here signs and those sorts of things.
Oh yes.
I've always found that those signs are more and more prevalent the wealthier and wealthier the neighborhood is.
Yes, and what do you think? So I think that's right.
Well,
and so what does that mean?
The more exclusive, ... the more inclusive. That's an interesting paradox. So the more financially exclusive the neighborhood is, the more quote unquote inclusive they claim to be. There's a kind of thou dost protest over much.
Mm-hmm.
As one of Shakespeare's characters says, there's a way in which people are performing a certain kind of inclusive social justice move in order to justify to themselves their own high social status. It's much healthier if we had a ethic of noblesse oblige, where people at the top of society had a duty to set a standard for the rest of our society, rather than this kind of perverse self-deception that I think characterizes this virtue signaling.
Well, I just want to stick with this for a moment longer, because I just believe that there are real-world implications that people are wildly underestimating. And I go to this review of Ibram Kendi's bestseller, How to Be an Anti-Racist. This is a review by Andrew Sullivan in New York Magazine over the weekend. And one of the things he points out, how to be an anti-racist, and it's all about political power, of course, is the basis of Kendi's book. But he points out that Kendi, not in the book, but in a forum, had advocated for, and this is like something from a Vonnegut novel, he advocated for establishing a federal Department of Anti-Racism comprised of formally trained experts on racism, no political appointees. The Department of Anti-Racism would be responsible for pre-clearing all local, state, and federal public policies to ensure they won't yield racial inequity, monitor those policies, investigate private racist policies when racial inequity surfaces, and monitor public officials for expressions of racist ideas. Yeah, this is not a parody. This is an honest proposal by a bestseller.
Yeah, 24/7 monitoring. Yes, right. Well, we already have it to a certain degree. On university campuses, there's really 24/7 monitoring of people's speech. I mean, God forbid you should use the wrong word. People get to campus, if they're not in the in crowd and don't know all the right words, they get shamed. Now, of course, scale that up and put the power of the government behind it, and you've really got a totalitarian regime.
So how concerned should we be about proposals coming from the Kennedys of the
Oh,
world,
I think
the speech codes in New York, where you can be fined $250,000 if you use illegal alien in the wrong context?
well, there you go. There's that careful monitoring of speech. I think this is a danger. There's no question about it. I mean, if you can build it out in the university context, why not on a larger scale for our nation as a whole? So I think this is a danger. It's a serious, significant, profound danger. I mean, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but if these people are allowed to have their way, they gain territory, and next thing you know, you wake up and they have the levers of power.
Hi, Rusty Reno, Amy Jacobson here. I wanted to ask you about Fil A and their surrender to anti-Christian hate groups. Were you surprised by it, or did you see it coming?
I was demoralized by it rather than surprised by it. I mean, the gay lobby is extremely powerful, and they're relentless in their efforts to punish anybody who dissents from their orthodoxies. And I think this is a case where they got to win.
Well, it's more than a win, though, too, isn't it? I mean, Rod Dreher, writing in American Greatness on this, made the point that not only is it a win, it sends this Chick-fil-A was a symbol of a corporation that was, standing against the cancel culture, to borrow a phrase. And so the idea is if they can get to Chick-fil-A, they can get to anyone, and thus resistance is futile, so give up.
Yeah, that's why I said I was demoralized by it. I agree with Dreher's analysis. It's a significant win. And I think it reminds us that if we care about the truth, we're going to have to pay a price. Yeah. And so all of us have to recognize that. It's probably always been so, but it's become even more so now.
Indeed. He is Rusty Reno. He's the editor of First Things, firstthings.com. It's a must read on a daily basis. Must subscribe, too, I'm sure Rusty would want me to say. Rusty, by the way, also his latest book, Return of the Strong Gods, Rusty Reno's book, which I've read and is excellent. You should pick that up as well. Rusty, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be on the show. Thanks. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs. Housing starts climbed almost 4% in October. Amusement park